Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Bristol Schools Forum. It's lovely to see you all. We've got a number of items on the agenda for this evening, so I'll move straight into the first item, which is a bit of a welcome and introductions. Some of you are new to Forum, some of you have been on Forum for a while, but just as a reminder, we are on the Council's YouTube channel, so therefore the chat function is not used just because those who are viewing from online are not able to see the chat function. So if you've got a question, please raise your hand. I'll keep an eye out for any virtual hands or any actual hands from Zoom as we go through the meeting. So we go through each section and then we'll pause at each point just to ask any questions or any comments. Okay, thank you very much. Hopefully everyone's had all the papers. So I'll move on to the second item, which is the election of vice chair. So Karina, could you take us through this one, please?
Yes, so we've had one name come forward, which is Simon Eakins. So are there any other nominations for vice chair? In that case, are people happy to support Simon being vice chair of the Schools Forum? I can't see anyone voting against. No? So Simon, you're duly elected as vice chair. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Karina, and thank you very much, Simon. It's good to have a vice chair, definitely in terms of some of these meetings. Thank you very much. Okay, so then it takes on to item 3, which is standing business. So again, Karina, that's over to you, please.
Okay, I've got apologies for absence from Trish Dodds, Tracy Jones, Liz Townend, and one of the new members, Mick O'Neill-Duff. We are quorate. We've got some new members on Forum. We've got Richard Pensker, who's here. He's a PRU governor rep. We've got Mick O'Neill-Duff, who was unable to attend tonight. He'll be the primary academy governor rep. We've had resignation. Rob Davis, the nursery governor, has now resigned. We've advertised that post, and there are 2 people interested. So we will need to organise an election within the sector for that post. Just to end, has anyone got any declarations of interest? No. Okay, thank you, Sarah. Lovely.
Thanks very much, Karina. And it's great that we've got some names already in relation to some of those vacancies, which is great. Okay, so I'll take us on to the next item. So I'll take us through the minutes in a second, but there is one item in relation to additional items for the agenda. And Karina mentioned this to us briefly just before the start of the meeting, but this is going to be Karina's last meeting as clerk to the Forum. She's going to be taking on a new role. So I just want to take the opportunity to say thank you very much to Karina. You've been fantastic in terms of supporting the Forum. So sadly missed, but we've also got Sam, who's going to be joining us and taking over the role. So thank you very much. Okay, so Karina, in terms of the minutes, right, so thank you very much for those. I'll just take us through in terms of any comments in relation to accuracy. I won't take us page by page, but any comments in terms of any notes that they wanted to raise or any amendments? No, I think everyone's happy with the minutes. Thank you very much. Okay, so there are a few matters arising. I'll just take us through those. Okay, Alison, in terms of the first section, which is on page 4, there was in relation to free school meals eligibility and the software that we use to check it, and you're going to respond. I think this was in relation to Chris.
Yeah, so colleagues from Trading with Schools had a discussion and follow-up email with Chris, and in relation to that kind of central function in terms of the frequency of the eligibility check, we can't do that internally due to data protection and safeguarding, but apparently schools have the functionality to run as many checks as they want through that period. So I know that there was conversations between, as I say, Chris and colleagues. So I don't know, Chris, if you wanted to add anything to that.
No, I did. Yeah, as you say, Alison, I got an email response to that. I haven't, to be honest, I haven't had a chance to go back on anything on that. But I still think that it would be able to do it even without the GDPR issues. But at the moment, we'll just park it as it is.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
Great, thank you. And then there was the written statement of action RAG rating, and that was action, Alison, in terms of updating that next time for Schools Forum.
Yeah, that was circulated to everybody.
Great, thank you very much. Sorry, Alice, another one for you.
I think they're all for me, Sarah.
I think they are. So the next one is on page 5 in relation to.
So this was to do with the phase 3 of the education programme, and I thought we may be in a position to want to move quickly with the information going out to schools, but we're doing a bit more due diligence around the procurement regs and just making sure that we've got everything that we need, and also obviously responding to some of the new publications that we've had this week to make sure whatever that school-based inclusion transformation piece is really kind of fit for purpose and aligned to what's happening more widely. So we're just moving to the point of advertising for a lead to take this project forward over the next year. The idea, and I'll update in the director's update in terms of the timeline for that, but it's all on track for getting something out to schools after Easter, and then obviously all in line for a September start date.
Great. Thank you very much, Alice. And then I think the final one is just around the trade union facility time for maintained schools, in relation to how they'll be able to access that.
Yeah, so I've again followed up directly to Chris on this, and there is outlined the process for making the claim. Chris has come back with some really useful feedback on the first time that obviously he's using the system, and sort of navigating it was quite challenging. So has suggested some sort of crib sheet or process sheet that we circulate to schools. I'll raise in the next education trade union meeting, which will be coming up in the next few weeks, and see whether or not colleagues can pull something together.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's it then in terms of matters arising and the minutes from last meeting. So taking us on to the next one.
Oh, sorry. Can I just bring up one on page 7, which is the de-delegation for the insurance? It's not an action for anyone, but there has been some movement on that since the last meeting.
Thank you very much, Chris. I think there was a colleague from the council who was going to talk about insurance.
Okay.
If they were able to join us. I think we talked about that in the planning meeting.
Yes, we did, and Paul has agreed to come, but due to diary clash, he won't be here until 6 o'clock. If we could bear with us, if that's all right, and Paul has promised that he'll join after 6 as soon as he finished the other meeting.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. Thank you. Is that all right, Chris? We'll catch up
that's fine.
later on. And if Angel, if you could confirm when he arrives, please, just in case I miss his joining the meeting, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so the next item then is the director's update. So Alison, over to you, please.
Brilliant. Can I share a few slides, Sarah? Just
yes,
to
please.
Support the conversation, because it's all starting to get quite complicated, as you'll see. So what I wanted to do in the director's update today is really just try and outline the range of different programmes and pieces of work that's happening at the moment, in relation particularly to obviously education transformation, some of the inclusion programmes, and particularly in relation to the DSG management plan and the whole high needs block deficit. So this really is sort of a lead into the DSG management plan, which Angel will come to later, but it's also in response to a really useful discussion that we had at the high needs block task and finish group recently about how do we pull all of this together and get something really clear for forum members to understand how it all connects, but also to then move forward to something with some clear milestones that we can kind of measure progress. So just in terms of this first slide, what this is doing is just pulling all of those different pieces together. So just for a bit of history for those new to the forum, and also looking ahead, we obviously started in 2021 with phase 1 that was very much about that response to the 2019 locality send inspection. So it was a real kind of improvement programme in order to deliver against the milestones in the written statement of action. This was funded in a number of ways, but particularly schools forum interest was that top-up funding that came across for the high needs block, that 0.5%. We've obviously brought back quite detailed progress reports, and the most detail being in November, where we had the discussion about whether or not Schools Forum would fund phase 3. So if it's useful to new members, we can circulate some of that historical information as well, just to give you a bit of background on this. So what you see on the left-hand side really is that whole governance in relation to that phase 1 and phase 2, ultimate governance sitting at the Send Improvement Board in terms of that Send Improvement journey. And you'll recognise again within that lower box on the left, a lot of those projects that are funded by Schools Forum. We then moved into phase 2, and again, that was still very much responding to the written statement of action, but actually moving across to starting to align that to some of the pressures that we saw appearing within the high needs block spend. And particularly thinking about that whole development of the DSG management plan that started happening at this period. So we're technically still in phase 2 and due to finish in March, and then kind of pick up in phase 3. So if I then move across to the right-hand side, we are now thinking about that phase 3 in rather a different way in terms of that whole sustainability piece. So again, when I brought the proposal in November's meeting in terms of that funding, we talked about the fact that this is very much likely to be the last year, and in some ways should be the last year. Not just because of the hard funding formula, but actually, if we've done our job with those first 3 years, we should be moving into something that is more sustainable. So this is now focused and really much speaking to that DSG management plan, and also thinking about the high needs block spend and making sure that we've got that value for money built into the work that we're doing, and also that high needs block deficit recovery piece that's sort of built into the DSG management plan. So what you've got here on the right, and I'm going to unpack this in a little bit more detail, is obviously the current focus and the focus for 22-23. So we've really got to make sure that we deliver all of those phase 1 and 2 programs, and that we do, hit those milestones and do what we intended to do when we started them. We've just talked a moment ago about the programme of school-based inclusion projects. So that's where the Schools Forum funding, about £1 million of that Schools Forum funding over the next academic year is going to be focused on inclusion-based programmes with schools, clusters of schools, sharing best practice, and that will be created through the bid system, which information will come out in the coming weeks. We've obviously got the development and maintenance of the DSG management plan, so that work is still continuing, and as I said, Angel will talk in more detail to that, and you've obviously got the financial breakdowns in your packs tonight. We then want to finalise a high needs block recovery plan, and the reason we want to do this is because I think what would be useful as a forum is if we kind of extract some of that detail out of the DSG management plan, because it's quite a dense document, and actually put it into something where you can clearly see measurable milestones and targets, and actually that will kind of sit as a sort of overarching plan, sit underneath the DSG management plan, but be far more transparency, I think, for Schools Forum to see where all the different programmes are going to be delivered and what that looks like. So that's a piece of work that we've started. The other reason that we think we would want to move to that high needs block recovery plan is this one in the bottom right hand side in the circle, which is about something called Delivering Best Value in Send programme. And this is a new programme that the DFE have launched that Bristol will be eligible for, and I'll talk in more detail in a moment on that. But what that plan will do, it won't replace the DSG management plan. So we're technically going to have almost 3 different pieces running in parallel. So you've got your DSG management plan, you've got your supporting the DFE in delivering best value action plan. This is why we think we need a high needs block recovery plan that almost will kind of suck up both and put it into a format that you can monitor and engage in from a Schools Forum perspective. So that's the idea, and obviously I'll circulate these slides afterwards so you've got a record of it. Now, one of the pieces of work that we've brought here in last year in September, we're starting to think about some of those mitigations that will actually deliver that better value in terms of the high needs block spend and bring more outcomes-based pieces into the system, but also make sure that we're kind of spending within budget in the right ways. So we've started to, obviously, through the Education Transformation Programme, we've got a number of programmes that deliver to this. So what I've done here is just set out where we've got the proposed themes within our new high needs block recovery plan. So you've got on the top left there, reduce the reliance on placements in independent non-maintained schools. You've got support and drive mainstream schools to meet a higher level of need, improve efficiency of commissioning, and so on and so on. So we're going to have themes within that high needs block recovery plan. We've already got in that lighter purple all of the different programmes that are already delivering, and we will again articulate that in that high needs block recovery plan. And then we are exploring at the moment other elements, and this is to do with that evaluation we did against the safety valve that we bought in November. We're looking to identify other elements that we think we need to address in order to make sure that we're tackling that deficit. So those areas in purple are currently in exploratory stage, so they're not decided upon, but I thought it would be useful just to bring that to Schools Forum. So I'll just talk a little bit to those. So in terms of that, review the effectiveness of the notional SEND budget. We've got a situation with our top-up applications and the top-up funding system. Obviously we have in regards to the statutory funding, but also in Bristol we have that non-statutory funding piece, and this was set up 10 plus years ago, and I think what's happened is we've sort of moved quite far away from the original intention of the top-up funding, which was to do with shorter term pieces where outcomes were demonstrated and you really saw whether or not the value to that child or young person had been delivered through that top-up scheme. So what we are considering is whether we need to do some sort of review of all of our live non-statutory top-up plans to look at how long they've been in place. So for example, if they've been in place for 4+ years, is there an argument that actually that young person aren't being met at that level and they need something more advanced, or again thinking about where needs are being met at the school-based stages of the codes of practice, whether or not we need to step down. It's a big piece of work. We're just doing a bit of scoping at the moment to see whether or not it is almost doable given the amount of work that would mean, or whether actually we start introducing new applications with that tighter framework in place. So that's the discussion at the moment. The other one relates to targeted SEND reviews. So again, something that we used to do that we haven't done for a couple of years, partly to do with COVID and obviously where schools have been, but really thinking about when we know that there are schools where the SEND provision could be better, where we've maybe had the schools had their Ofsted and it's identified areas for improvement. We're looking at actually doing some targeted SEND reviews to support those schools. Just in terms of Ofsted, from 2018 to 19, 36% of Ofsted inspections identified SEND as an issue out of those schools in Bristol, and that equated to 14 schools. Obviously, there was that break in terms of inspections due to COVID, but since 2020, only 4 schools have been that have been inspected, which makes up 16% of those that are inspected have had SEND as an issue. So we've definitely seen that improvement, and I think this is where we can be more targeted in terms of identifying that support. Bottom left here, really thinking about that commissioning work and delivering best value within our commissioning, and there's obviously been quite a lot of development in that space. I think we're all agreed that our social, emotional and mental health contracting and commissioning is an area that we need to look at in more detail. We've still got young people out of our school system whose needs we aren't able to meet, so what we've got to do is make sure we've got provision across the city that is fit for purpose for our young people now. And that may be different to what we needed in place 5 years ago, but it's making sure that we have a sector that's working for our young people, and where we don't have examples that we have now where we have provision with high levels of suspension maybe. Actually, it's got to be able to meet needs, so we need to think about how we do that. The next one on is really thinking about special school funding, and again, certainly conversations I've had since arriving with colleagues in school leaders in the specialist sector, that this really is something that we need to look at. We are outliers in Bristol in terms of the way that we fund the use of top-up. Other local authorities just have a set amount for special schools, so we need to look at that process. We've also got a number of legacy agreements with different trusts and schools that need to be just reviewed, and we need to create an equitable and transparent system that delivers best value for money. So there's definitely a piece of work to do there as we move forward. Very similar is that post-16 funding review in the next box. So again, we've got a sort of legacy issue that's sort of evolved. We need to go right back to the regulations around the ESFA funding. We seem to have created a system that just sort of drifts from schools into post-16, whereas actually the post-16 regulations and what we should be doing in that space are quite different. So that's a piece of work that we need to really identify. And then obviously the rest are all areas that we are currently delivering in. So just moving down to delivering better value in the SEND support programme. So we've talked previously at Schools Forum about the safety valve arrangements. So this originally was a programme that was delivered to 15 local authorities over the last year to 18 months. That's now been extended, or I understand it's being extended to 30 local authorities. Below that is something called Delivering Better Value, and that's open to the 55 local authorities who have substantial but less severe deficits than those in the safety valve programme, and Bristol's been invited to be part of the Better Value one, so we have been invited to be part of that 55. It's about looking at the deficit plan, it's about putting more LAs onto that sustainable footing, and also making sure that we're in a position to respond to the forthcoming SEND review reforms, which obviously, for those of you who clocked it, that was published today. So the Delivering Better Value programme, it's a 3-year transformation programme. They are currently identifying delivery partners. I think that went out to tender just after Christmas. And what we will get as a council, as a local authority, is some project management support, some change management capacity, and then SEND and financial and subject matter expert support as well. And there will be a 6-month deep dive or diagnostic period that will really look at what those underlying cost drivers are for Bristol, and how we can start to mitigate against those. Now, obviously, all of the local authorities involved, I think, have already been working on their DSG management plan. So nobody's starting from a standing position in this space. But it's about really getting that expertise in, getting some diagnostic tools that have been proved to be successful in other local authorities, and applying that to the work that we're doing over those 6 months. What will then come out of that is another action plan, which is why we're going to have those 3 kind of running alongside each other, and a 30-month programme. And during that 30-month programme, we will be identifying what reforms we need to put in place, what the detail of that looks like, and we put an application into the DFE for that funding. So unlike the safety valve, where that funding goes directly into your deficit, this will be funding that will enable us to deliver further programmes in response to that diagnostic piece. There'll be quarterly reporting, I assume, to the DFE on progress against this, and that will obviously take us through with the idea that we have a high quality SEND system that we're able to deliver within budget. There hasn't been discussion about what happens in terms of the deficit budget, but it's about bringing your annual spend in line with your annual budget in the high needs block. I did a bit of digging because this is all very early, and they're going to start with 20 local authorities, and I've certainly expressed interest to say we would want to be part of those first 20. So I did a bit of digging on the internet and could see that InPower Consultancy has been awarded the DF contract to be the lead partner. They did quite a bit of work, and again I can forward some links and slides if you're interested, with Lincolnshire in terms of that best value model, and that was very much based on a diagnostic piece, looking at SEND system management, identifying a kind of value score, and as I say, underlying drivers of high spend. It also has a significant focus about meeting greater needs in mainstream, which if we look at the education white paper yesterday and the SEND paper today, we can see that all of this is completely connected. So just in terms of timelines, I'm not going to go into too much detail here because I will circulate this, but again, just you've requested previously that you kind of just wanted to see it all in a bit more of a Gantt chart. So this is breaking down those main programs and those new pieces such as the delivering best value in SEND, and really just identifying some of those key milestones. I'll talk about this specialist provision piece as part of the place planning presentation and where we are with that. And then, as I say, we will put this into a more detailed plan where you can actually see the outcomes, those milestones, and then start kind of holding us to account in terms of delivering those. So I think that's it, Sarah. I'm very mindful there's a lot of information here, and it's quite complicated with the new programs coming in, but hopefully that's helped. Let me just stop sharing, and I think it might be easier when you've got the slides in front of you as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Alison. I think that was a really helpful update, and we have mentioned before that there's lots of different programs going on at the moment, so to have that all summarised in a couple of slides I think will be really helpful for 4 members to reference at a later date as well when we're talking about different plans. And I definitely welcome the high needs budget recovery plan in relation to those targets, and us being able to review where those targets are, because then we'll be able to, like you say, hold you to account in terms of delivering on those milestones and targets as 4 members as part of our role. But thank you very much, and also sort of the heads up on some of the potential areas that we may be looking at in terms of mitigations going forward. I think that's helpful too. Does anyone have any observations or comments that they want to share on what Alison has just shown us? Richard?
Just a very quick question, and of course it's in danger of being ill-informed, but I'll have a go. I just wondered, Alison, if there was any aspiration from the sort of best value programme as to how much money that would release or unlock. So presumably we are receiving some monies within Bristol to run that programme. Have they got a price tag against what they think you should be able to find?
No, they haven't done that yet. So we've only had a very brief introductory session with the DfE earlier on this month, and basically the first piece they fund is this whole delivery partner piece. So we will at some point get the resource to run the diagnostic. Once the outcome of that has happened after that 6 months, that will be worked up into a costed action plan. We then submit that costed action plan to the DfE, and they basically say whether or not they'll agree to fund the whole plan, part of the plan, and so on. So there'll be a bit of a negotiation. I'm not sure if there's a finite pot of money for this, but they said certainly, don't let that lead what it is that you need to do, and put your plan in that you need for Bristol.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Richard. Good question. Anybody else? Melanie, I think you had your hand up. No? Okay. So Alison, if we aren't successful, I think you've answered it. We will just continue with our own plans if we're not one of the 20 in the first round, because I'm assuming the next one wouldn't be them for some time.
Yes, I think they've probably got to. I don't know how frequent they'll start the new round. I'm really hoping, given the size of our deficit in Bristol, that we'll be considered for those first 20. They're also, I should have said actually, if at any point all parties feel that the best value programme is more fit for purpose for Bristol. So, for example, if we look at some of that trajectory in terms of our growing deficit, then there is the possibility to transfer mid-programme onto the safety valve. So it's not a complete no-go area. So there is potential in the future.
Thank you very much. Okay, Simon? Oh, there's both Simon got their hands up. Simon Holmes, over to you.
Yeah, no, thanks. I just wondered with the as part of this, the early years funding task and finish group. Is that a point to feed back at any time today? Because I've just been given a list of bullet points to feed back. So I don't know how this ties in, but of course, I think it does.
Yeah, I think it ties because we talked about when we were planning the meeting, Alison doing the update, and then we've got the DSG management plan update that's on the next item of the agenda. So I think we could do it now, or we could do it on the next item.
Yeah, I'll do it on the next item because I think, yeah, thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks, Simon. Simon?
Yeah, it's just an observation about the safety valve thing, and I see that South Gloucestershire fell into that because of the size of its deficit. I think I read something recently. So I was just wondering whether it was worth, Alison, your counterpart there, keeping in touch with them and seeing what that looks like, because I expect that safety valve is a bit being done to by the DFE. And so, yeah, it might be just worth keeping in touch with them as to see how that goes.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And when we met the DFE, one of our questions was obviously, is there a particular threshold that you need to reach in order to then move across to the safety valve, or end up in whichever programme, and it depends on the size, but also the local authority or council's ability to manage that deficit as well. So there's not an exact science behind it. You're absolutely right. If it is the safety valve, then it isn't optional. You are instructed to be part of that programme, whereas technically this is an optional programme, and we could choose not to be part of it. But obviously, we do see the benefit in having that support from the DFE and obviously the funded actions going forward. But yeah, I'll take that point and stay close.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Alison. Okay, the next item is item 6, which is the DSG management plan. I think, Angel, you're going to take us through this one. Is that right? And it's, yes. And just to make everyone aware in advance, it's about an update to the plan and any thoughts on proposed mitigation. So it's for information and comment. Yeah. Angel, thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Yeah, the paper is on page 10 of the information pack Karina sent out. The updates is based on what we reported to the forum in November in comparison to now. So there are two major changes highlighted in the paper. The first of all is, as you probably know, that the ESFA has announced 22-23 budget allocations in December. And subsequent to that December announcement, they announced additional high needs block funding of 2.69 million to Bristol and other local authorities as well. So those are the major changes, and one of the major changes in the papers. And so the effect of that is obviously it's reduced our deficit at 2025-2026. In the last version, we reported the forecast deficit position was 89.1 million in 25-26. Now it's reduced down to 85.5 million, as opposed to the overall high needs block increase. The reason being is that within the January announcement, and the ESFA also informed us the uplift of high needs block increase in 23-24 needs to be 5%, and the future years forecast growth in terms of funding allocation is about 3%. So we made that adjustment as well. So overall effect is about £3.6 million deficit reduction at 25-26. So within the paper, and so what we've presented to you is give you a table summarize the funding allocations in DSG block in 2021-2022 in comparison to 22-23 really. So overall, the increased funding allocation is 4.4%, of which high needs block, had an increase of £9.8 million, which is significant. However, as you know, that the high needs block in year deficit is forecast to be around 12.3 million in this year. So unfortunately, it's still not sufficient for us to cover our overspends. And so this is why we are engaging with ESFA on the delivering better value for sand program. as well as ask the forum in November to continue funding the transformation program. And the aim of that is obviously to get us back to the sustainable footing. The other change within this paper is the in 22-23, because of the work we're working on at the moment, and in the anticipation of additional work coming through from ESFA delivering better value for sand. So we have removed the mitigation targets of £870,000 for in 22-23. This hopefully give us more time to work through the mitigations plans and work with ESFA delivering better value for sand program, and to make sure that we have consulted and worked through our hypothesis, making sure our delivery plan is robust and going forward. So these are the two key changes in the papers. Everything else is remain more or less the same along the line of the November version. I don't know if there's any questions at this stage.
Okay, thank you very much, Angel. Has anyone got any questions in relation to what's been presented? We've just got one brief one on how the numbers are calculated, Angel. So we've got another item next, which is Ian's going to take us through pupil placement. Do we factor that into the forecast? In terms
Absolutely, yes.
Rebecca?
Is it okay if I ask a question relating to the previous agenda item? Sorry, yes. I just wanted to look some dates up. The paper that's come out today, the green paper, clearly there's some of the stuff in there is about potentially putting in, I think, a national framework for high needs funding rates. And then one of the elements that I think you had on your summary slide, Alison, was about top-up rates and historic agreements are in place for trusts. How is that going to be managed? Because we're going to potentially be trying to do something locally while a consultation is going on nationally that might then bring in national changes. I appreciate it's only come out today, so it might be more appropriate for the next meeting, but I was just wondering what your thoughts were on juggling that.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Really good point, and that's exactly what we're going to do. So basically, this is a kind of moment of where we are now, and obviously we didn't know what the content of the outcome of the SEN review would be in, or even when it would arrive, given the lateness of it. So we've been just continuing in the way that we had established. What we now need to do is pretty much what you're saying, a kind of cross-reference of those key themes that are being consulted on. I think we need to understand what the time frame would be for delivering those. So obviously it now goes into the consultation period. It then will need to go from a green paper to a white paper. I think we need to understand whether this is something that's going to happen within a year, 2 years, 3 years. If it feels like it's going to be very different to what we're already doing, and it's something that's going to come in quite quickly, then I think we need to take a view as to what we do with our current work, what we pause and why, and articulate that really clearly. If it feels like it's a long way down the road, then it may be that we continue with what we're doing as an interim piece, in the understanding that that may move into something that's more formulaic nationally. So I think we're going to have to do that, not just with that, but actually with quite a number of those areas.
Okay, and we'll get an update at the next meeting?
You'll get an update on that, yeah. And it's why we want to go into that detailed high needs block recovery plan, because I think that's where we may decide to pause or stop something, and we can then be clear on the rationale as to why.
Right, okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. Simon, if you wouldn't mind feeding back now from your early years group, that would be great, please.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so the situation with maintained nursery schools does budget deficit management is required, and everybody's kind of working on trying to bring those down, focusing on the 4 schools with the biggest deficits at the moment. but that isn't easy. So the challenges with COVID, loss of income, etc., are large, and it seems like every time you save on something, you get another cost increasing. Like the impact of energy bills coming through now is going to have a big impact. The difficulties in, right now, we've got more cases of staff COVID than we've ever had. And it's a big problem. I mean, I know not just in our school where we've got 9 staff off with COVID, but right across the sector. I don't know, it's not making the headlines anymore, but this is having a financial impact on schools and trying to stay open, trying to get cover, increasing costs. So these are pressures that are all ongoing and real. So these are the sort of challenges that we're facing, whilst at the same time trying to reduce costs with vacancy managing, not filling posts, making sure, everything is as streamlined as it possibly can, whilst at the same time meeting the legal ratios that we have to meet because of the age of the children and the safety requirements. I think what's really positive that's coming out of it is groups of schools working more closely together, looking at ways we can share expertise, maybe save costs, looking particularly, I think, round of Senko roles, maybe having kind of group Senkos, maybe sort of shared leadership across different schools. But these are all things which kind of take time, and we've started working on them a couple of years ago, and then COVID came along, and so all the timelines are being pushed back a bit. But developing federations of nursery schools, leadership and governance is definitely a way that we are going forward. I think what we really need support from the LE is to contribute to the sustainability of nursery schools by looking at 2-year-old funding, which is insufficient. The role we have in SEND, which is enormously important. I mean, nursery schools are the front door for early years childhood services. We often pick up the children with complex needs first. Often a lot of the work done is with talking to parents, carers about their children, many who might not even accept their child has those needs. And there's a long process in all of this, because at the end of it and at the beginning of it, we are the people they talk to when they come through the door. So I think aligning with other services and recognizing and acknowledging the importance of that community engagement and trust within the new Future Family Hub delivery, etc., is really important for our sustainability. So I think it is again about alignment of services. So I think all these things, all these areas are connected. So I think, I mean, there was a comment a couple of years ago, and I can't remember who made it, but it was no one who was here. Well, you sort yourselves out and then we'll talk to you. But that doesn't work, because we're not part of the problem, we're part of the solution. So I think there has to be closer strategic working with other directorates, like with health and with social care, because a lot of that work is work that we also do. And I think that really is where we need to go next. So one of the conclusions of the task and finish group was that we haven't really finished at all. And we would like to continue as we go forward with this DSG management plan and the SENS stuff, to continue the conversation and to work out ways that we can integrate services better for a better delivery. And I think it ultimately will reduce costs. So we're not duplicating roles. So we're maybe locating services in the areas where they're needed most. Maybe using some of the school sites for locating family support, health workers, etc. And I know that's the case, that people want to work on the ground with families. And I think a a remote, at the moment it feels a bit like there's a remote peripatetic service which doesn't really work for families. So I think we need to move more towards people on the ground seeing families. Thanks.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for feedback on early years. Alison, quite a few things there from Simon. And, you know, as a forum, sometimes we can get quite involved in the high needs element and then, you know, forget that budgetary challenges in our schools at the minute and nurseries, etc. Because we're focused quite a lot lately on high needs, but there obviously are some other challenges out there. So, Alison, did you want to come back on Simon's comments, please?
Yeah, thanks, Simon. Really good overview in terms of where we are, and I think, you know, your appetite as a group to continue as a task and finish group is really supported. I think that would be great if you could stay focused on that. Obviously, what you mentioned in terms of the 2-year-old funding, this is an issue. So it's less of an impact if you're delivering 2-year-old funding through a primary school model, because obviously you have a larger budget, you can maybe sort of mitigate against some of those. But when you strip it all back to actually that funding, it doesn't cover what it needs to do, and that's not a, you know, that's a national issue, and we really need to look at what that means for our smaller settings, such as our maintained nurseries. The role in SEND as well, really important, as you say, Simon, that's the first point, that's that front door, and really integrating services, I think, is the way that we're all looking to move. We've obviously got the integrated care systems that are being put in place at the moment across health. I know colleagues in children's social care are moving towards a more of a locality model, and we have obviously got we've started to develop the family hub model in Bristol. We have put an application, or did put an application in for the funding to be one of the first phases to be funded nationally by the DFE. I'm still waiting to hear. We should hear by the end of this month, and given it's the 29th and I haven't heard, I don't think it's going to be this week. But as soon as we know, if we are, that's nearly, you know, £1 million that we would have in order to create the full infrastructure. But work has already started on that. There's a Bristol-wide steering group from health, education and care partners coming together, and a number of different work streams have been developed over the last 18 months to kind of get ourselves into that position. So everything Simon's talking about is absolutely where we need to be, and what we're working on. And then that whole closer strategic working piece, I think you, again, absolutely right, but that needs to be the role of that new family hub steering group, to really think about that from a strategic place-based model of support. And then you've got things like, you've got your co-location, you've got really effective use of different kind of disciplines and professionals within that space, but also recognising where parents are. And, you know, most schools and settings, and the nurseries particularly, they see parents, you know, they see parents regularly. So we really need to make sure that they are a significant part of that model going forwards.
Okay. Great, thank you, Alison. Now, we did have the high needs task and finish group meet as well, but I don't think Aileen's with us today. Alison, are you able to give us a bit of an overview of that meeting, please?
Yeah, certainly. I think probably, Sarah, what I've done is the director's update was in direct response to the discussions that we've had. So we were looking at the new figures which Angel's gone through, but I think there's a real sense from the task and finish group that actually we need to just get clarity on what it is we're looking at and how we're measuring progress. The previous task and finish group, we'd gone through all of the kind of data and the what's driving those numbers, so that had happened. And then this was about, so how do we move forward? How do we kind of align the mitigations with some of those wider pieces of work coming in? So hopefully, if Aileen was here, she would say you've covered it off in your slides.
Great, thanks, Alison. And I know we are looking for additional members to join both those groups, actually. So if you are able and eligible, then please do. I really encourage you to support those groups, because we are able to go into a bit more detail around some of these subjects that we're able to at forum. So thank you very much for those of you who are already part of them. Okay, right. Any other questions then for Angel in terms of the management plan? No? Okay, thank you very much. Right, it takes us on to item 7 then, which is place planning. So Ian, are you going to take us through this one?
Sorry,
I will
Sarah.
do.
Sorry, Sarah. Just want to let you know Paul is here to answer any insurance questions.
Great, thank you, Angel. Well, we'll go to Paul now then for insurance, and then we'll come to your item next then, Ian, okay? Paul, I think you've been invited to give a bit of an overview of the delegated use of insurance and what it covers and what it doesn't cover. If you're able to provide that to form, that would be very helpful. No need for an update, a few minutes will be fine, thank you.
Okay, great. So we went out to a tender for our insurance arrangements for schools effective from the 1st of April. Basically the insurance market is hardening, meaning that the availability of cover and cover itself is getting more expensive. As such, restrictions in the tender received meant that the more favourable option in terms of price and quality is now via the Department for Education's risk protection arrangement, which is a widely used scheme to use for school insurance. And well, it's not technically insurance, but school cover. As such, from the 1st of April, maintained schools are going to receive cover through that arrangement. The dedelegated funds have already been agreed for the 22-23 period, and the nursery and special schools payment is a to be confirmed figure, but it will be decreased to be more in line with the delegated schools figure. The aspect to note on the cover change is that all schools should have access to their confirmation of membership documents via the DFE sign-in page. If anyone has any questions around access to that, or if anyone wants their confirmation of membership document directly from us, insurance@bristol.gov.uk. The good thing about the scheme is that because it's very visible on the DFE website, you can pretty much gather all information around the cover provided by the scheme. It's in comparison to what we received before. The only difference being that whereas before the council were responsible for an excess of around 50,000, it's more ground up cover, meaning that excess is either nil, 250 or £500, depending on the type of school it's involved. So we do still have to respond to the claims received that we may receive for the previous years in respect to the £50,000 excess, but there is a lower excess in the current arrangements. And I'm more than happy to take any questions online or offline. Easy.
Thank you, Paul. That's very helpful. Is there any additional insurance that's required outside of the RP?
Yeah, we still maintained our contracts for schools for engineering inspection. So that's just statutory inspections. And it's not an insurance as such, but it's just statutory inspection for lifts. We are going to have a bit of a comms approach around that, because we need to ensure that all lifts and lifting equipment is inspected by law. So we need to make sure that we have a comprehensive list of that equipment. We do actively go out and inspect most of the equipment we leave, but if there's been any new equipment, or if you're aware of any equipment that hasn't been inspected, please do get in touch with insurance at Bristol and we can hopefully point you in the right direction. In addition, the school's motor insurance is included under the RPA, so you'll continue to have access to the preferable rates of our main motor insurance contract for school vehicles such as minibuses, etc., and that will sit separately to the RPA provision. The other thing to note is that we won't be charging any additional premiums in addition to the DSG amount, because that's now all covered by the RPA. So it will be one payment other than the motor insurance, which will be charged separately on a per vehicle basis.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Any questions? Chris?
Please. Thanks for the update, Paul. Just a couple of things then. So in terms of the RPA, will we have to have the pool insurance, that covers governors, school trips, or is that included?
That's all included as well.
Included, okay. You mentioned at the start, obviously, that the dedelegated funding or charge of about £31, isn't it, has been levied for this year. But with the RPA only costing £21, what's happening to the difference?
That will cover the costs of the engineering inspection services, our administration and the assistance of claims, and the cost of the risk management services we provide, the access to the cost of the tendering for the motor insurance, those aspects of cover, in addition to the claims we continue to receive for the previous year's insurance. So we will continue to have legacy claims come through this year, for instance, that have happened prior to the 1st of April.
Right, because that works out at 188,000 difference that I made. So is that all going to be used up to cover what you've just said? Because that seems an awful lot of money. Yeah, I
can have a look into the detail of it. As far as I'm aware, the figure's already been agreed for this year.
I think that would be helpful, Paul, because I think what we're saying is we agreed a figure, and then now obviously the RPA is slightly less, so it's just to have a clarity of that breakdown around what the difference will be spent on, which you've helpfully sort of provided overview, but if we could have that breakdown for a future meeting, I think that would be helpful.
Yes, please.
Any other questions?
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for attending, Paul. Give us an update.
No worries.
Okay, right, Ian, over to you then on place planning.
Thanks, Sarah. So you have a report from page 15, I think, in your paperwork, and I'm going to attempt to share my screen with you. So let's see if we can get this. And I'm going to run through some slides, and then Alison will take over just towards the end of this. So I really starting off with the year 7 for September. We received just over 5,000 applications, so not an enormous growth on last year. It has to be said, and I think you know, we need to. It's roughly in line with what the forecasting was, but there's a continued growth really into about 24, 25, and then we expect the numbers to start dropping. The pattern of applications was very similar to previous years, with some of the more oversubscribed schools having slightly reduced applications, but still very oversubscribed, and some of the less popular schools increasing their applications. So that's, on the surface, that is really good, that those schools are increasing applications. It makes our lives a little bit more difficult when, as you know, as everybody's aware, we've actually got more children in the system than we've got places available, so that our room for manoeuvre is reduced by those less popular schools getting more applications. There's around 400 first preferences for non-Bristol schools from Bristol resident pupils, which is very slightly up on last year, but only by a couple of children. So very similar pattern to previous years again. There's a continued, in terms of the place availability, there's a lack of certainty still around the Temple Quarter free school. I'll come to a little bit more detail about that, but that's meant that we've had to continue with some of the temporary solutions that we've got in place, and that includes both planned additional places where we've agreed that schools will admit in September more than their plan. And also those schools where we think the numbers will drop from those that are offered initially, and so we over allocate to those schools. But it did enable all pupils to receive an offer on the 1st of March. That was everybody that applied on time or that applied late for an undersubscribed school. They all got their offer on the 1st of March. In order to make that happen, Cabinet agreed some capital investment to go into schools, and we've been working with those schools on what's required. And I think as a sort of very general overview, it's not so much about additional classrooms in schools. It's the fact that with the way that the schools were designed, most of them being very modern buildings, it's things like dining, which just can't cope with additional children going in. So that's where the investment has been focused, in things like dining, to enable those schools to cope. There have been some challenges with that. Obviously, the available capital is relatively small for what needs to be delivered. There is across the whole construction sector, there are rising costs, and dramatically rising costs as well. There's also some time issues in terms of availability of people to do work, And something which we ran into this year more seriously than we've faced in previous years, PFI issues and costs. A number of the sites are PFI, and some issues coming up around that which we're working on to resolve. In terms of the offers made then, so we made just over 4,500 offers, 77% first preferences, 93% received an offer of at least one of their preferences. So people are getting something that they put down as a preference in general. It's around 7% that don't. That 93% is exactly the same as last year. The 77 is 1% up on last year. The vast majority that weren't offered a preference were offered another school in the same area of the city. Although, and again, this is been pretty common over recent years, is some of those in the sort of city centre to the south of the north, if I can call it that, have been offered places in South Bristol, which is generally where the availability of places is still in the system. So once we'd done those allocations, there were absolutely no places left over at all. And in fact, you know, obviously from what I said about over allocations, we'd allocated more places than we actually have. We tried to keep that to a minimum and tried to work with historical information we've got about how those numbers would reduce, because of course we do get some dropout with children going to independent, children moving out of the area as well. But we do also get late applications, and we've received around 150 already. So that's since the closing date. So that's not since the 1st of March, that's since the closing date at the end of October. So and we would expect we'd expect around 300 in total by the time the pupils start in September. That's generally balanced by the children who drop out of the system, but they don't come at exactly the same time. So we have the sort of temporary issue of making offers to the late applicants whilst we're still receiving notification that places are not needed. Those children that are refused a place obviously get the chance to appeal, and appeals are becoming more difficult in secondary. I think those involved in secondary school appeals would agree that as the offer that is made becomes less reasonable, I'll say rather than unreasonable, it gets harder to defend appeals. And as a city, we know that we have some quite extreme cases sometimes in terms of the case that's brought to appeal, which can make it very difficult to defend. And a number of parents will win their appeals for schools that are already full. Again, that does free up then places in the other schools that they've been offered in the system. So we would expect it to drop by the time the children start in September by a bit, but we'll still have, in common with the last few years, a real lack of spaces for in-year admissions. So that's movers into the city, or those just needing to change school for whatever reason. And a lot of the time it's not just about the parental preference to change school, you know, issues that are faced at particular schools, or moving house, or that transport comes into it, those kind of things. And that's really difficult for lots of pupils in the city at the moment, and will carry on into next year. That puts a lot of pressure on things like fair access, where children, now children, if they're not offered a place within 4 weeks, qualify to be dealt with under fair access. So it's meaning the numbers being dealt with at fair access are going up significantly. It also means, in the current situation, we really lack places for some of those emergency situations that come along, like the families moving in from Afghanistan, or the families that are going to be coming here from Ukraine. And even though some of those will be on a temporary basis, we just don't have the flexibility in the secondary school system at the moment. So I know Alison has tasked some officers with looking at where we could possibly create some capacity within the system and some flex. Beyond 2022, they said there still remains some uncertainty around Temple Quarter. We expect the Secretary of State's decision on the planning inquiry to be in early May, and if that happens, it's still technically, the DFE tell us, possible to deliver a temporary opening for the school in 2023. But further delays obviously mean that's going to be pushed to 2024, and we'll need yet another year of temporary solutions in 2023. So it's this continued uncertainty which has been very difficult, obviously, for us as officers dealing with the applications, for the schools themselves trying to know what is going to be happening, but particularly on families who just don't know where the places are available when they're trying to make applications. The South Free School is more positive in terms of what we know, that is still due to open in temporary accommodation in September 2023. And whilst the South has been in the past the area with some places available and with less pressure, that is changing significantly. And this year there was a lot of pressure for places in the South. A lot of the late applications are from the South, where children have been used to being able to get a school place very easily. And that has changed, and there's more. There are more families who previously would have applied for places out of Bristol are now applying for places within Bristol in schools in the South. So that will be needed for places in the South, but also will be a sort of pressure release, if you like, for the whole city as well, if we can have some places at least in 2023. The projections that are in your paperwork, excuse me, one of the main reasons for producing those from our point of view is that those are what the capital allocations from the DFE are based on. So they will fund us to provide those places up until the free schools kick in. But obviously, just having the capital is one thing, but as we've discovered this year, particularly, actually delivering projects that can be done in the time and within the cost is much more difficult where you're dealing with existing schools and things like PFI contracts in place and all of those things. Primary is basically the complete opposite picture. We've got continued fall in demand, and that looks like that's there for the foreseeable future. Birth rates continue to fall, and that's the main factor, obviously, in terms of the demand for primary school places. We've addressed the problem in two ways so far. One, we've started to obviously done some school closures. So St Pius, we closed at the end of the last school year, and we also did a reorganisation of C of E provision in the city centre, which meant, in effect, practically the closure of St George and of St Michael's, and then the opening of Willow Park on the St Michael's site. So that reduced the number of places available in the city centre. We've also, over the last few years, been reducing the number of places available by lowering the PAN in schools. So that's not taking the places out permanently. So if there was a sudden rise back up, we've still got the places at the moment, but it does mean that the schools can plan much better. We can also, in some cases, repurpose that available space for other uses, including SEND. We've got fewer oversubscribed schools this year, significantly fewer, and that means that there are fewer pupils to redistribute that aren't getting a preference, and that's putting even more pressure on some of those schools that have got very low applications. So some challenges there as well. But we do work each year with schools to try and manage some of the numbers. So if a school has say 2 forms of entry going in, but we've only got 20 something offers to make there, then what we can do is not put in any children that are that haven't received an offer, to try and keep them to 1 form entry, so at least they can plan in terms of staffing and those sorts of things. So we're currently starting to talk to schools about where they want us to do that, and the offers go out on the 19th of April. So that's my part. It might be easier if we let Alison do the SEND provision part and then take questions after that, if that's okay.
Brilliant, thanks, Ian. So just in terms of a more detailed update in where we are, in terms of where we are with increasing specialist provision, that's obviously we've talked about previously at Schools Forum. I just wanted to provide a couple of slides, and again, you'll get this slide pack, so you'll get the detail in terms of where we are with the different projects. So what you've got on this first page are the phase 1 and phase 2 projects that we launched just before going into lockdown with the phase 1. So that would be back in kind of November, March 2020. So we've had 82 places that we've opened to date since the start of this academic year. And you'll see on the left-hand side, a total of 142 through phase 1 will be delivered between now and September 2023. So there are some slightly larger projects within that will take longer. They have all now been confirmed, and so obviously we're working to deliver those. The phase 2 part of the programme opened more recently. This is the phase that we will be focusing on delivering the current shortfall between where we are now and the 450 places that we're going to need by September 2024. So we've already started a piece of work and identified 20 places, and there are others in the pipeline that haven't been confirmed that I haven't put on here. So as we start confirming those, and as we start identifying some of those new projects and new provisions, then we'll start adding to this, and you'll see that provision grow. Just moving on to the second slide, there are obviously not just through those first phase, not just through the phase project, but also through all the other work that we're doing in order to increase numbers as well. I just wanted to give you sight on this as well. So obviously we've had a number of capital projects and programmes that we've been investing in and we've been developing over the last couple of years. That will deliver 83 additional places, and you'll recognise some of these in terms of those larger capital programmes that have recently gone through Cabinet. So that's all on track. If these are the ones that obviously where that funding is secure, so that again there are other projects, larger projects in development that we will add to this. We've also looked at where, without capital investment, we have been able to increase capacity within existing specialist provision, which was obviously part of the strategy as well. And so we've been able to identify an additional 37 places. You'll see that if anyone who's very good at adding up mentally will see that that bottom table adds up to 47 and not 37. And the reason being is we've had to reduce 10 places across the city in the specialist provision. So the actual additional numbers of places is 37. So just on the bottom right there, in terms of where we are at the moment towards our target, obviously these are the ones that are approved. There is still a small amount of these that we just need to tie down the funding for. And obviously we've got our high needs capital allocation to do that, and that will all go through Cabinet papers, I think probably later in the summer. So we've delivered and got on the trajectory, 282 places so far, which is, you know, really positive, and a huge thanks to all the schools and settings that have been involved in opening new provision, and I've managed to get to visit some as well. And there's some fantastic new provision that we've got across the city, and also those that are still engaging, and any new discussions that we need to have in terms of future projects and programmes. And I'll be taking this slide to the head teachers briefing next week as well, really looking at how we can identify meeting that next phase in order to get to that 450. I think particularly on the back of Ian's slide on the primary challenges, really thinking about where we can repurpose and reutilize some of that space, and also thinking about maybe some of those community responses and resource within our primary settings as well, which we know support many of our young people who have SEND as well. So it feels like we've kind of managed to stabilise this, and actually we've got a really clear picture of where we're going and how we're going to deliver it.
Thank you very much, Ian and Alison. That was a really helpful overview of the places in all different areas across Bristol. I've got a few questions myself, but I think I'll open up for questions from others first. Simon?
Sorry, it's a question for Ian, really. Do we know how many refugee children there are in Bristol of school age, and do they all have places?
So I haven't been dealing directly with them to tell you the numbers, Simon, but we can certainly find those out for you, unless Alison possibly knows those. I know
I would have to. Yeah, I'd have to look up, because obviously we're a city of sanctuary, and we have the Afghanistan resettlement programme. We've still got the bridging hotels open as well, with young people who are moving in and out of the city. We have opened obviously to Ukrainian families, and we've had the first few arrive, particularly those that are accessing the Children's Hospital, and we're just in the process of sort of working through what the Home to the Ukrainian framework will look like, and what that will do to numbers. Obviously, certainly any new arrivals previously have got school places. The current new arrivals through the Ukrainian scheme, I know we've been able to place all primary, and we've just had the first heads up of secondary, so we will obviously look at the challenges at placing there, and whether or not we need to do something more exceptional in the short term, particularly of those families that may not stay in the city for very long.
Yeah, it's just when Ian said there's no spare capacity for emergencies. Think, well, we have an emergency and we're a city of sanctuary, so we've got to make sure there is.
And that's the piece that we're just looking at the moment. Is there something creative that we can do that means we can meet those needs instantly as those young people, secondary age children, come into our city? Obviously, the first period of time is, I think, a 6-month period. So again, sort of working with settings to see what the art of the possible is, really.
Thanks.
Okay, any other questions or comments? No, okay. I've got a couple. One is in relation to primary schools, and I think we've talked about this previously, Alison, but Ian, in your figures, you're showing that in 2024, I think we're looking at capacity across the city of 5,500 pupils, yet we're only anticipating having 4,480 pupils. So that is 20% more capacity than we actually need. So there is going to be some challenges around the viability of some of our primary schools. So I'd just like to understand a little bit more about what we're trying to do to support those as we go through the next couple of years.
Do you want me to take this, Alison, or do you want to say anything?
Yeah, do you want to start, and I'll come in?
So the sort of very short term things that we're doing include that management of the numbers as we're allocating them, so that schools can plan for it's particularly around staffing being one of the major costs. We're then also talking to a lot of schools and advising them how they can officially reduce the PAN, so that we reduce the capacity in that way. And again, and that allows obviously much longer term planning in terms of their structure. And then what we need to do then is look at the longer term strategy, which we're working on over the 10 years, to see what else we can do. What we've said previously is about, we obviously want to try and avoid large scale closures, because there's the sort of one certainty is that if the numbers are falling now, they will go up again in the future at some point. But it's how we manage that, and if we can find alternative uses for some of those spaces in the short to medium term, then that will obviously help things. Obviously, at the end of the day, there may be instances where we need to look at school closures, but that's not the sort of top of the list in terms of how we deal with the issue.
Yeah, just to add into that whole alternative use piece. So obviously some of the projects that you've seen are exactly that, where you've got capacity and extra physical space within some of those primary settings that we have repurposed and open specialist provision. We will continue to look at that as an option, given the need in the city, and particularly where there is that benefit of having provision that is attached to a mainstream setting, so you have that transition between the two for those young people that need that. There's also, it sort of loops back round to Simon's comment earlier about that whole kind of integrated service and community approach to supporting families and young people, and that's the piece that we're really looking at, is how do we, particularly if we get the family hub bid, but more generally under some of those large-scale locality changes, is how do we think about schools with more of a community lens as opposed to just a pure education lens, and if there is the ability to either integrate or certainly sort of identify, again, physical space within a building that can be repurposed and used, that either creates an income for that school or certainly creates a new resource for that community. That really, I think, is the area that we want to get in terms of those discussions, so that we kind of stabilise the school from a financial perspective. We make sure that the provision is protected, if you like, going forwards, but also that we're moving forward in a more creative way about how we work or how we get different organisations working together within that locality.
Okay, thank you both. Good to see that there's some actions in place because of that. Those numbers are looking, quite stark. Steph?
It was just to ask Ian if he could confirm the basis of that primary capacity, because Ian, you mentioned that you consider the capacity where schools may have reduced PAN, but those places are not permanently removed in the fact that the facilities have space. So is that the numbers that are being shown there, are those with or without those PAN reductions?
So those are with PAN reductions that have gone through the I'll say official reduction process, because it's different for maintained schools and academies, but with maintained schools where it's been consulted on and agreed, and then with academies where it's part of the admission arrangements, and that has been has gone through the proper process. It doesn't include where we're working with schools on that short term in the current year process to reduce the numbers.
Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Ian, you mentioned appeals as well in year 7. How are we supporting schools with that process?
Well, it depends on the schools, because some buy into the service, so that we have presenting officers from the local authority and things, and obviously then the principal or someone from the school comes along as well to give details. Also looking at what the case that's being made is to try and strengthen that as much as possible. But it is really difficult. We know that there are schools with extremely strong cases as to why they shouldn't admit more pupils. Those are accepted by the appeals panels, but then the individual cases of the pupils are incredibly strong sometimes. And it's difficult to go into detail, isn't it, about individual circumstances, but some are very, very difficult circumstances, and it's understandable why panels feel that that school would be the appropriate school, despite it accepting that it doesn't really have places and it does affect the education overall. I think we've tried to emphasise with panels that schools are being as flexible as possible, and are already in the, for the majority that are going to appeal, the school has already admitted over PAN or has done what expansion it can. So we can just do that. It is very hard because I'm not aware of an instance where the panel hasn't accepted that the prejudice exists, as it's called in appeals, so that the school is adversely affected by the admission of more pupils, but then the case for the individual child is seen as outweighing that prejudice.
Okay, all right, thank you, Ian. And then just final question is in relation to the temper quarter score. So in terms of projections, we can see that there's fewer numbers coming through in primary, and the temper quarter score, I believe, is still going to be a 240 PAN, which will be the largest school in Bristol. Is the expectation that size school is still needed and to be delivered, if indeed it comes back favourable that the development will go ahead?
So I think that's really it's a decision for the DFE, obviously, as to what they decide to open it as. But certainly our view is that should be looked at. Yes, whilst I think we do need. So I don't think there's any question we need more school places for quite a long period. So a new school is needed, and we have got schools which are operating way above the numbers they should really have in, and they can. Reduced down to a more sensible level. The 8 forms of entry now looks very high, because of the schools have expanded to cope with the temporary issues that we faced.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions for anyone? No, thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Ian. That was a really helpful overview. Thank you for the slides as well.
Thank you.
And Alison. Right, then our final item for this evening is the Dedicated Schools Grant Budget Monitor update at the end of January. So getting closer to year end. Angel, are you taking us through this one? Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. This is the routine report which we provide to the forum. This is the update as at end of the January. So this has taken into consideration of ESFA 21-22 allocation updates as well in January. So the early years funding has been reduced because of the lower participation, mainly in 3 to 4 year old, and a little bit in early years as well, 2-year-old as well. But there is no deterioration in terms of the forecasts of the deficit position because of low participation, so low funding really, so no effect there. So this is the only highlight or change from the period 8 position which we reported in January forum meeting really. That as other than the early year funding changes which had no impact to the deficit position, so we're still forecasting a in-year deficit position of about 16.8 million plus the 10 million is about 26.8 million, which we reported to you in period 8. I'm conscious that I'm in between your break and so yeah, this is the highlights. So I can take questions if there is any further information you wanted to know, but there is no changes to other blocks or in terms of fundings or forecasts. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Angel. Do you anticipate much movement between now and year end?
Obviously we're working on the year end. The year end position will be available to you at the end of May. We're hoping that we work through what the forecasts throughout the year, so as accurate as we can be. Fingers crossed we'll find out in May.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions? No. Okay. Thank you very much, Angel, for the update.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that brings us to the end of the meeting then. Just take us back. Are there any other items of any other business from anyone? No. Okay, well, just to reiterate, thank you very much again to Karina, and thank you all. I hope you all have a good evening, and I'll see you again at the next meeting.